Shut up and sit down.
Hi and welcome again to ctl-alt-del-church. This week Kenny and I are joined by Iain Campbell, and I'm not going to tell you anything else. You've got to guess what he does from his background. Iain, it's brilliant to have you along. Can you tell us a wee bit about who you are and what you've been up to?
I paint portraits. Here's some of them behind me. Recently, I was over in Bosnia with the charity Remembering Srebrenica, and this coming weekend is the 25th anniversary of the genocide of Srebrenica, which I do find a lot of people in the UK kind of forget about. Mm-hmm. Most people remember that in Bosnia that there was the capital Sarajevo, and that's where the Winter Olympics were in 1984 with Torval and Dean, and then they might remember that they used to have, well, it used to be part of Yugoslavia, and we used to get, when we were all kids, a car called the Yugo from there, which wasn't great, but it was, it was a place like Sarajevo was just a kind of modern European multicultural city. But then neighbours started turning on one another. There was this terrible situation where the Bosnian Serbs decided that essentially they wanted to take over, and that there would be this kind of ethnic cleansing of everyone who was Muslim. So, 3 decades after we'd said never again with World War II, all of a sudden we're in this situation where we're seeing this situation of genocide. And it's quite remarkable. It was incredible being over there and meeting some of the people and finding out that little bit more of the story. As well as those paintings that I've been working on recently, I worked for St George's Tron, Church of Scotland for 3 years. I was artist in residence there, and some folks might be aware of the Last Supper painting that I did. Yeah. That's probably the best known piece that I did there. But I did a 3-year project doing paintings for a painting for each chapter of the Gospel of Luke. As part of that project, which was an incredible opportunity.
You've been a busy man. That's it's good, because they have this picture of struggling artists who can never get work, but you seem to have you've done all right in the last wee while.
Well, yeah, it takes a lot of peddling, but it's and a lot of the time nothing's going to land in your lap. You need to make work, and you need to get yourself into situations where people will be interested in seeing your work. And the first couple of exhibitions that I did, 2013, 2014, I didn't make a penny from, So it's not the kind of thing where you can just launch into. There's a lot of build-up before it's going to start paying the bills.
So you started off by talking about Srebrenica. The thing, as you said, I remember I would have been in my late teens, must have been around the kind of the 90s, early 20s. And the thing that I remember that kind of stuck that part of the world in my consciousness was actually through a different kind of art, through music. At the time, U2 were touring their Zoo TV stuff, and every night during the show, Bono would phone someone who was in Sarajevo, and they would talk to people who were living in that city and all the kind of stuff that they were experiencing. Obviously, some of the Zeropa album was kind of influenced by that, and then the Passengers stuff. So art around that time was the thing that kind of kept that in my conscience at the time. I wouldn't have known an awful lot about it, some television stuff probably, but it was the music of the time. That and particularly what you two were doing. But so 25 years later, you were able to visit. So you spent some time there specifically to meet people and to find out about people, but so that you could come back and tell that story to other people.
Yeah, and what Remembering Srebrenica does, it's not just simply about remembering those particular events. The charity really wants to try and get across to people what hate does and where hate comes from. I was particularly keen to go because last August, where I live in Govan, we had a sectarian riot. Now, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. I've lived in Govan for 20 years. Grew up in Linwood, and there's always been the sectarianism stuff around. You'd see the orange walks and all the different stuff that people in the west of Scotland are very familiar with, but never had I seen anything like that. Anytime there was a Rangers Celtic match, anything going on, it was all quite calm. Sometimes things might be boisterous, but not like that. And we seem to be in a time where there's political tensions that have risen up in lots of ways. We can see it in different countries all around the world. Things are tense, and I wanted to be able to point out from a real example where hate comes from and where hate leads to. So on this one day, 25 years ago in the little town of Srebrenica, which was a spa town, it was like Crieff or something like that. 8,000 men and boys were killed because they were Muslim. And it's appalling. And I was really shocked to learn some of the detail about that. There was UN forces there, but the UN had hardly put anyone in, so they were a bit defenceless when the army came rolling in. So it was pretty shocking to find out all this stuff. Funnily enough, you'd mentioned about art keeping it alive in your mind. I was 19 when the genocide happened. The exact same age as this guy behind me, Hassan. He was born 3 days before me, and he had a twin brother who was murdered in this act of genocide. There should be two guys that look just like that. But he was 19 and I was 19 at the time. And I think of what my life was like back then. I was studying at art school, and I was aware a little bit of what was going on in Bosnia through the arts, because Peter Howson was the official war artist for the UK at the time, and he painted a whole load of stuff, which were really, really, really harrowing paintings, but they stuck in my mind. And I always thought, if I ever had a chance to do something a bit like Howson did, I would really jump at the chance, but not just trying to depict the war as it was, but about what are the people's lives like now.
You've made a couple of videos, and we're going to see one of those just now.
Brilliant.
I travelled to Bosnia in November with the charity Remembering Srebrenica Scotland, and I've painted portraits of some of the people I met. Kadifa is part of the Mothers of Srebrenica Association, a group of women campaigning for justice to be done and the truth to be told about the Srebrenica genocide, the worst massacre in Europe since the Holocaust. Kadifa fled to Srebrenica in 1992 when the Bosnian War started, just 2 days after giving birth. She begged her husband to leave her behind as she could hardly walk. He said, "I will carry you, but I will not leave you." And they walked together for 22 days through the forest. Srebrenica was designated a safe area by the UN in 1993. The area used to have less than 10,000 residents, but by then it was under siege and packed with about 60,000 people, mainly Muslim refugees. On the 11th of July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces attacked Srebrenica. The Dutch UN troops there to protect the town failed to stop the assault. Thousands of men and boys who didn't believe the UN would protect them tried to walk through the hills to reach a free territory. The vast majority were unarmed. Kadifa's husband was among the men who tried to flee. She never saw him again. the men and boys who stayed were killed. The Bosnian Serb army slaughtered more than 8,000 Muslim men and boys. More than 20,000 women were raped during the war. Kadifa became a widow at 27. Her husband's body was found 18 years later and laid to rest at the Srebrenica Memorial Centre. The mothers of Srebrenica have never sought revenge and have never acted with hatred. They say that hatred is a sign of weakness, which they refuse to give in to. All they ask for is justice and truth.
So, with that painting, the lady in that one, Kadifa, she's part of this group, the Mothers of Srebrenica. And, you know, there's all these women left behind, husbands, sons, all killed. And there's been this group for the past 25 years of these women fighting for justice. That the truth would be told about the incidents, because there's still people who are genocide deniers. And that still goes on to this day in neighbouring areas in the region, which is quite frightening, something that's a fact in international law. People will completely try and dismiss. But there was, Remembering Srebrenica do a great job. They take quite a lot of folks out, maybe 4 trips a year. And quite often they'll have politicians going out. I think Nicola Sturgeon, Ruth Davis, and Joanne Lamont, loads of them have been out. So a lot of the MSPs have really been getting a handle on this story. Prince Charles was supposed to be out there very recently, but of course just about everything on planet Earth's been cancelled. And meeting these women was really quite incredible, because they're very matter of fact about the things, the terrible, terrible things that they had to experience. And what's really important to them is that they're not out for revenge, and they're not hating. And they really see hatred as a sign of weakness. So they try and remove that from their motivations and just looking for justice to be done and truth to be told about this situation, so that it won't happen again. You know, that people will understand what happens when people hate.
Some of these women are still waiting for their relatives, their husbands and their sons and their brothers to be identified, aren't they? There's an ongoing DNA project. Yes,
and I actually painted a woman who, I'll be releasing a video of her tomorrow actually, who has for the past 14 years been doing DNA testing, and every year on the Memorial Day they have another round of people being buried, and sometimes it's a very small part of their body. Sometimes it's a leg bone that's being buried, and they're hoping that eventually other parts will be found, because the bodies were put in mass graves, and then they tried to the army tried to hide the evidence. So all the graves were dug up, with diggers, and dumped in other places, and then dug up again and re-hid. So sometimes bodies would get scattered over 5 different sites. But they've got the biggest DNA testing facility in the world over in Bosnia. It's in a town called Tuzla, which was where they had a refugee camp back 25 years ago. And the lady I met, who's the doctor over there doing most of the work, her work is, as well as reuniting people with their lost loved ones, and they can have that closure, her work's used in the war crime trials as well. It's quite astonishing.
Really interesting hearing you both talk about your memories of it, because obviously I'm a different generation, but it's the first, that and Rwanda were the 2 first big news stories that I can remember as a child. Like Srebrenica and the war in Yugoslavia and Rwanda and genocide was a thing that I became very aware of at a very young age.
Yeah.
And I'm also in quite an interesting position because Ian Bonamy, Lord Bonamy, is a Motherwell man. He went to South DL, my old church, and was one of the judges at the war crimes trials.
Oh wow!
He was the sitting judge and presided over. I've just looked up his Wikipedia page, hence why I'm looking this direction, folks. He presided over the trial of Serbian President Milan Milutinovic, and also he was appointed to preside over the preparations for the trial of Radovan Karadzic. And he went to my church, so it's really interesting when you hear, because my mum and dad knew him from being members and things, and it's fascinating how these things come back to roost sometimes. You know, you get someone like that who grew up in Motherwell, went to my high school, and was the judge at in The Hague for it. You know, it's an interesting way it all comes back round.
It really is, and I think it's just so hard to imagine because it's a place that people go on holiday.
Yeah.
You know, it's not far away. It's you know, often I think, you know, Kenny mentioned Rwanda, that you know, Rwanda's a faraway place with people who don't look much like us.
Yeah.
And so it's really easy to externalise that kind of thing and say, you know, that happened far away and that could never happen here. Bosnia's just over there. You know, it's not far away, and the people.
Yeah, and they've got McDonald's and they've got Zara, the clothes shop. Do you know?
Yeah.
And if you're in Sarajevo, the capital city, very close together, there's a great big cathedral, there's a great big mosque, there's a great big synagogue. People lived side by side very happily. It's you know, and they had the Winter Olympics. You can still go up the to where the ski slopes were, and what do you call those?
The ski jumps.
Yeah, the big carriage they take you up on ropes.
Oh yeah, no, the cable cars and stuff.
Cable cars and gondolas and yeah.
All that, you know, all that's there. Great place.
Yeah.
And then there was this horrific scenario. And you know, and there's things that people don't like to talk about as well as the 8,000 plus men murdered. The numbers are very vague on the thousands of women who were raped. And it's a horrible subject to talk about, but the numbers I'd seen written down were that between 20,000 and 50,000 women were raped during the war. And that's really hard for me to get my head around. And it was used as an act of war, and as an act of genocide. Truly horrific.
And so difficult to then continue to live in that place with those people. You know, and to as you were saying, you know, to try and move forward, but not to do it in a hateful way and to want revenge, because you know, can imagine that would be the first thing that everybody wanted, is revenge rather than justice. And justice is a very different kind of beast, isn't it? That you know, the telling of the truth so that things can be better, as well as those who are guilty, you know, should face punishment for what happened, and they have. And you know, the kind of the war crimes trials were groundbreaking, and even to then, I mean, I remember watching some of the particularly the kind of the ends of them, and the leaders involved were adamant that they had done nothing wrong, you know, and really didn't see what the problem was. You know, they had, you know, and it just, as you said, it beggars belief. But these people still live in that place with the same neighbours, and they've managed to work it out to a greater or lesser extent. You know, that they've managed to, through the telling of the truth and uncovering of what happened, they've managed to move on and work it out and continue to live, which, you know, would have been incredibly easy, I think, for for people facing those kind of circumstances, either just to leave completely or to give up completely and to live very bitter lives. And that's not what you discovered at all.
No. I think one of the things that I find the most challenging, and you see it in other places, is that those who have done terrible things convince themselves that they're doing the right thing.
Yep.
And that is one of the most frightening things. Bad guys don't think they're bad guys. They think they're the good guys. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to get past that with a lot of folk. But I guess what I'm trying to do with the art, rather than put up an argument, is trying to make people curious and draw them into a conversation rather than bashing them over the head with facts. Probably the best example I could give you of that is when I was working in St George's Tron. When I started on the first painting project with Our Last Supper, the cafe in the church had just opened, and people would. Well, do you know how it is on Buchanan Street? It's a busy street. It's the busiest street in Scotland under normal circumstances. I recently saw someone with a film of a deer running up Buchanan Street, so it's been a wee bit different recently. But under normal circumstances, it's the busiest street in Scotland and the second busiest street in the UK, second only to Oxford Street in London. So if Starbucks is kind of full, people will just look around for the next thing that says cafe. So the church opens up a cafe in a busy place. People will wander in and give it a go. And I'd be working away on this painting. People would get their cappuccino and their scone and all that kind of thing. And then sometimes people would be curious enough to wander over and ask me, is that the Last Supper? They would realise there was 13 people getting painted around the table. And the next question was always inevitably, which one's Jesus? Every single time they would ask that. Now, when I started that painting, I was doing it just on Saturdays. And every Saturday, there was a guy preaching out on the street. You've probably passed by him if you've been in the town shopping. He'll have a loudspeaker and shouting into the loudspeaker. Most people are trying to just avoid this guy. Sometimes there'd be kids with skateboards heckling him. But, people are trying to give this guy a wide berth. They're trying to just dodge this fella. He thinks he's doing a good job shouting about Jesus, and people are ignoring him. But when given an opportunity to be curious, people want to know more, and they come up themselves and ask. And I had so many conversations with Joe Public about Jesus because they started the conversation, and that was something I learned a lot. It was that was really quite exciting, actually, seeing that art could make people curious enough to want to know more, rather than shoving it in their face. They were asking the questions,
and it helps that you're up for that conversation. Famously, artists can be incredibly tortured and introverted, and you're not. You're happy to chat to anybody that comes into the cafe, and you're not bothered that people are interrupting your work or that kind of stuff. That conversation's part of the process for you, isn't it?
Yeah, and that did become kind of like a 3-year-long performance art piece, which was great, and I really enjoyed that. It's a very different way to work, but it was we knew that it would be part of the project right from the start, and we built that in, and that was really enjoyable. I got a big buzz out of that.
So that painting is of guys who are. Well, you tell us, who are they?
Yeah, so the cafe in the church was working in partnership with Glasgow City Mission and Bethany Christian Trust. So a couple of nights I went down to Glasgow City Mission. They've got the soup kitchen on, and first time I went down, I just kind of hung out and got an apron on and dishing out soup and having a blether with folks. Next time I went down with a camera, and Ewan, one of the staff, working down at the mission, he had a chat with some of the guys because he knew them, and said, look, we're going to be doing this project in this church, doing a Last Supper painting, looking for people to be in it. So we got 13 guys that were that were interested in that. So the people that ended up being in that painting was just whoever happened to be there on the night, which was exciting. And I was very tempted to try and plan things meticulously in advance, but that doesn't work if you're working with guys who are going through homelessness. You just need to kind of roll with it and see how it goes, which is quite exciting because there's something that the model brings to it that you can't plan in advance. So I really enjoyed that part of the process. That was
I've got a print of that painting. I've got several prints of your paintings. But that for me, it's a really powerful image for, people can go and, there's a picture of it on your website, and we'll put the link in the show notes so people can go and have a look at it. But the thing I love about it is the ordinariness of it. We have this kind of view, Da Vinci's Last Supper, where everybody's sitting on the same side of the table.
A table for 26 instead of 13.
All of that kind of, these guys are sitting round a table, they're eating crisps and sandwiches and, drinking cans of juice and all that kind of, it's such a normal meal. But it's not, because I know that these guys are all homeless. And for them to gather around a table and to sit together and to eat together isn't a normal experience for them. It's sporadic, isn't it?
Yeah. And I really had Matthew chapter 25 the whole time I was taking the photographs and working on the painting, when Jesus said, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. So the question would always come up with people. They would ask, oh, which one's Jesus? And I would never give a straight answer to that, because actually the truth is any one of these people could be Jesus.
Yeah.
Because whenever the poorest folks, and that's some of the poorest people in Glasgow, are in front of you, then somehow, and I don't quite get it, but I don't know if I need to, but somehow Jesus is involved in that conversation.
So do you work from photographs then? So is that how you don't paint live, almost like you take the photograph and...
Generally, yeah. Particularly with that piece, there's no way you'd get the same guys twice. With the homeless guys, it would never quite be the same thing. Getting them to sit still long enough just for the photographs was a challenge.
Yeah, you'll always have somebody moving or someone doing something. It's like
I deliberately had to learn a lot more about photography over the years to work on portraits, and it's handy because if I've taken some decent shots, then I can be working on a painting at home at 10 o'clock at night. I don't need people to continually be there. And thankfully, just before lockdown, a whole load of photographs I'd taken for some paintings that I'm working on just now. Because getting models just now just wouldn't have been possible. Although a friend of mine has been doing a self-portrait every single day.
That'd be good if you weren't going to cut your hair or like shave your beard. Kenny went through a stage. If you look at the first episode, Kenny's trimmer broke very early on.
It broke the weekend before lockdown.
You mentioned your first exhibition. Was that Manosaurus?
Yes, that's right.
So that fascinated me for a range of reasons. Firstly, that somebody that I used to work with could paint and have an exhibition. I thought that was great. Because that was like a secret thing at the time. I knew you were an artist, but all of a sudden you're like an actual artist with paintings and stuff. But it was about Noah, wasn't it?
Well, there was a bit of that in there. There was a few different themes. There was this perpetual theme with some of the paintings, not all of them, with these figures floating in water. And I was at the time really struggling with the idea of the Noah's Ark story, which is a genocide story that we turn into a children's story with all happy animals smiling and waving at you, but it's really quite horrific. And I think people need to delve into these stories a bit more. There's a lot of stories that we only use as children's stories in the Bible, but they're a lot deeper than that. I've recently been reading and rereading the story of Jonah, and doing a wee bit of study on it, and realizing that some people have classified it as a satire. You know, it's almost like Gulliver's Travels. And you know, there are things to be rediscovered, looking again and again and again at the Bible. There's always something that takes me by surprise, and things to wrestle with, you know.
Yeah, and art does that. You know, all of a sudden, you know, you know, I hadn't seen the pictures, and all of, you know, you're kind of saying, well, you know, these remind me of the story of Noah, and it's bodies floating in the water. And I'm thinking, I've never thought of that before. Don't know why I've never thought of that before. You know, because, you know, in a big flood where everybody's killed, then that's obviously what's going to happen. Except you filter all of that kind of stuff out. And it's amazing, I think, you know, the power of art, and obviously that's something that you've discovered in your kind of public art life, is that these stories challenge people to look at something differently. And so you know, your Last Supper, these stories, you know, paintings of people in the water and people who are sad. You know, there's some incredibly moving images in that exhibition of, you know, like men crying, which, you know, nobody ever sees. You know, that we keep those things so private, and then to display them publicly allows people to connect with those emotions and to start to ask questions about, well, what does this mean for me? What does it mean for society? What does that tell me about God and all that kind of stuff? It's an incredibly powerful gift to be able to give to people, isn't it?
And there was one of the paintings in the St. George's Tron series where there was a woman with a black eye that I painted, and it's really interesting how people react and don't react to that, because generally in media you're not supposed to show women not looking nice. And it's a stark image, a harrowing image, you know, and it's a woman who had a lot of stories to tell. But yeah, it's very challenging, and I like to be able to have chances to get people to stop and think and reflect on things that aren't maybe always at the forefront of their mind.
That whole project, so to paint all of the stories and look, is massive. You know, it's such an undertaking, but to have to stop and you know, read each story and think, you know, this is 3 or 4 lines sometimes in the Bible, or, you know, kind of a couple of paragraphs. What would that look like? And then to think about, well, what would that look like now?
Yeah,
you know, and to find a way to represent that so that it tells a story from that we can connect with. So these are all people that you've, you know, the models that sat for you, that you've placed into these biblical stories, but they're all you know, none of them are you know, imagined 2,000 years ago. They're all somewhere in Glasgow. You know, so how did that process work for you?
That was a really interesting one, because I think it's not a million miles away from what a preacher does on a Sunday, where they have to get a story to connect with people in the here and now. And some of those paintings came about very easily. Some of them came about kind of by accident. Right at the start, I was making very, very deliberate, planned, conscious choices. One of the first paintings I did was the Annunciation. So there's a woman who was portraying Mary, and I looked at a lot of the historical paintings. So there's a lot of historical elements that were put into that. So there was very deliberate choices I was putting in there, and then had to find a model to go in. As the project went on, I was very influenced by the people I was meeting in the church community and in the cafe community. And we were talking earlier about our friend Fiona Morrison, who's in one of the paintings, and she was going through chemotherapy. And she's an elder in the church. And under normal circumstances had very long flowing dark hair, and then had less hair than I do. And she came up to me one day and said, I'm not going to look like this much longer because I'm about to have my last chemo session. Is it any use for a painting? And of course I said yes. Didn't know which one it was going to be at first, but I knew that there would be a way to work that in. You know, and people take things that are in front of them and they'll put them into their sermons and use it as an illustration. And I decided in that instance to, I was thinking about when Jesus talks about worry, and you know, look at the flowers and look at the birds, and they don't worry. And I had to hold that intention with a situation that everybody's familiar with, whether they've gone through cancer themselves, whether they're thinking about a loved one who's gone through cancer or is going through cancer. You can't not worry. And there's no way to tie a neat bow on that theologically. You just need to sit with the tension that here's this, and it's hard to reconcile. We're told, don't worry, and you can't not worry. And we just need to sit in the middle of it. So meeting people was always a constant inspiration. And I think the most important thing about that for me, taking inspiration from the people that I would meet, I was always looking for something where I could see God reflected in a person. This idea that we're all created in God's image. And I really believe that there's something that I can learn about God from every single person that I meet that I couldn't learn from someone else. That it's kind of like a different portrait of God. You know, if you're a sketch of God, and it's a different sketch than anyone else, what can I see here? And I'm always just trying to explore that question with any portrait that I'm doing.
That's a wonderful idea. And I guess what painting a portrait allows you to do is look closely in a way that other people don't. You know, we even the people that we know and we love, we don't examine their faces in the way that you will, because you have to look to paint, you know, and to see them in a way that other people just won't see each other.
Yeah, and funnily enough, in 2014, the exhibition that I had in Edinburgh at the Scottish Storytelling Centre, I called it A Closer Look. And it was in September 2014. It was the same time as the independence referendum. And somehow I'd managed to persuade politicians to sit for paintings. And I had three of the political leaders, Nicola Sturgeon, Ruth Davidson, and Joanne Lamont, who was Scottish Labour leader at the time, painted their portraits. And they were 3-foot square canvases, really, really big. So literally, you're looking closer. But there's an obvious metaphor in there, because there's lots of political debates where people get quite tribal about, and there's always more to consider and to think about, and trying to see things from different perspectives and understand the full picture. So yeah, that looking closely idea is really important to me.
There was a moment around that time, which was, as you say, it was a fascinating time in Scottish history, particularly in Scottish life. And you know, for you to manage to persuade these three political leaders to sit for you, I think you know, says wonders about your persuasive powers. But there was a moment, I remember they used to talk to each other on Twitter like they were pals.
Yes.
Which was lovely. You know, there's a very different kind of, even though they were sometimes the fiercest of political enemies, they spoke to each other like pals, you know, and they would invite each other along to their office to watch the tennis or something like that. You know,
I remember that, yeah.
Really kind of human kind of things that in some way I think that the three pictures capture, because they don't look in any way serious in them. You know, they've all got a kind of openness about them, which really captures that kind of moment, even though we were in the middle of this great big political conversation about the future of Scotland, and they really, really disagreed about what should be happening, but they still seemed to treat each other as people. They saw each other, which, you know, I think your painting really reflected. You seem to paint people on the edges, apart from these three women who are right at the centre of power. Most of your stuff has been about people on the margins. You know, so the guys from the City Mission, the people of Srebrenica. You are the affiliate artist to the UNESCO Chair of Refugee Integration through Languages and Arts.
Yes, indeed.
It sounds very posh, but it means again that you get to paint people whose voices are often either in danger of being not heard or have been silenced.
Yeah, and I think what's specifically interesting about painting a portrait with those kind of folks, normally when someone's getting their portrait painted, it's because they're really important. It's the Queen that gets her portrait painted, do you know? I've not got around to her yet, but you know, someone like our current Queen has had, at last count, 93 official portraits. So that's kind of what you're saying, that I value you. You are important. To spend time and effort looking at your face, and that's been really interesting, just to be able to bring some attention to people who could be more invisible. Something I was really proud of last summer was through in Edinburgh, around about the time of the Edinburgh Festival. I was asked by the Royal Society of Edinburgh, who've got their headquarters on George Street, to do some portraits. Now, they've been commissioning portraits for hundreds of years. Their members go back to Sir Walter Scott and people like that. And the last time they commissioned a portrait was Professor Peter Higgs of Higgs boson fame. And throughout the history of all their paintings, they'd had one woman and everyone was white, which is not a great surprise if you're talking about historical paintings. However, I was really proud of the organisation. They were trying to move forward, and they'd specifically had a group of new members who were all from refugee backgrounds. So I got asked to paint 5 of them. And there was one of the folks, Deborah Kayembe, who's a lawyer through in Edinburgh, originally from Congo. And she said out loud what was in the back of my mind: I will be the first black face on those walls. And she really admired the paintings. And it was quite incredible for her to be included in that. And it was incredible for me to be the painter doing that. So it's, you know, it's nice to be able to be part of pointing to people who aren't normally in the spotlight.
And that, you know, all through that project, the Gospel of Luke, you've done that. You know, there are women and men from all parts of the world represented. You've chosen people, you know, the kind of the least likely, which, you know, I think is an incredibly biblical thing to do. You know, that the stories are all about these least likely people, and yet sometimes, you know, you in the kind of history of art, that, you know, it's a bit like the Royal Society's paintings. You know, they represent, you know, these gospel stories of people with opulence and riches, and, you know, the folk weren't like that. You know, that Jesus was talking to the poor and the marginalised, and it's just brilliant to see that those people, those voices, those faces held up to us, and kind of reflecting back what we see. You know, it's one of the I suppose the things I love about particularly Glasgow, but Scotland as a whole, that Glasgow on the whole has really embraced people who've come to live here from wherever they've come, and your art reflects that. You know, that,
yeah, it's exciting to be part of that, and you know, I love Glasgow, and it's a very honest city.
The sun's rising and there's a cross on the horizon and all that sort of stuff.
Even the artwork that you'll see painted in the streets, there's a gable end, great big mural that's St Mungo, and it's someone chose to paint a guy who was homeless as St Mungo, and it's great. And I think it's a city that is very happy to ask questions and to kind of poke at things, and not just accept things because they've always been like that. And I hope that's a tradition that will continue.
Yeah, and it allows, you know, one of the reasons for this podcast is to ask the question, what next?
Yeah.
And I suppose one of the things that art does is allows us to explore some of those questions in a way that is not as threatening as sitting down having a a strategy meeting or you know, a kind of a conference about it, because what you're doing is you're inviting a question. It's always about inviting a question. You know, art's about saying, well, what does that mean to me? It allows me to give my response to that, whereas someone else's response might be different, and then we can have a conversation about that where neither of us need to be wrong.
Yes,
which is wonderful.
It's nice, and with the paintings I was doing in St George's Tron, everybody had something to say, and everybody could join in the conversation, because there's stuff in front of you and you look at it and you say what you see and you say what you think, and so many conversations started with that Last Supper painting. The second most common question after which one is Jesus was, why are they all men? Which is a perfectly good question.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't just trying to represent the Last Supper as was. You know, I'm really interested in the act of communion as a sort of, as it being almost like a play, where the cast is forever changing, and we're swapping people in and out all the time, and this is getting reenacted again and again, this Last Supper. So it's always a really valid question. Why are there no women in that picture? And the actual answer was really, really simple. Glasgow City Mission work with men and women separately, because most of the women have been horribly abused who are accessing their services. So all the women were on the first floor rather than the ground floor, and there was only about 4 of them, whereas there was about 100 guys.
Me is the irony of the fact that those people would quite
so that was a very practical
in a thing full of straw, because that's what happened in the gospel.
There's always a question, and I remember one guy was really upset about the painting. I wasn't even in the sanctuary. I was having my lunch, and working on my computer in the little office upstairs, and Beth, the cafe manager, came up and she looked kind of exhausted, and she said, there's this guy downstairs that wants to speak to the artist and he's upset. Okay, here I come. And so went and spoke to this very agitated man, and so I asked him what he was thinking about the painting, and he thought that the painting, the table in the painting should be infinite, so that there was space for everyone to sit on it, to sit at it. And I said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's just not what I did in this painting. And I explained to him why I did what I did in this painting. But because we didn't need to disagree, the argument was gone. It could just be a conversation where, oh, you've made an interesting point. I like what you're saying. That's an interesting way of looking at things. And here's why I did it this way. If I was doing it again, it would probably be completely different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would, because, for a start, the guys around the table would be different.
They'd be different guys.
As you said, the people coming in and out of the scene would be completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very glad to know that some of those guys who are in that painting are doing okay. Some of them have got jobs, and I know one guy, he got married and he came in and his new wife showed me their wedding photos. Things move on for people. They don't move on for everyone, though.
Yeah. One of the criticisms around that painting at the time, and I remember having a conversation with you about it at the time, was that folk were getting really upset that you had chosen to paint these people. And there was issues around folk were saying, that it's about their power and all that kind of stuff. And I remember having a chat with you, and you'd been really honest about, I asked them and they said yes. But other people were imposing all these views on what had happened, and whether or not, in some way you were exploiting people or that kind of thing.
Which is a good question.
It's a great question, isn't it? It is, and your work, because it captures people who are in some way often powerless. It's a great question to ask about what you do. So how does that dynamic work in what you do?
Before I started that painting, that was something I was really concerned about, actually. And there was a few people that I spoke to a lot about it. I had a cup of coffee with Martin Johnson one day, who at the time was running the Church of Scotland's priority areas stuff. We talked about motivation and what was the motivation for that painting. And at the time, there was a few TV shows that people were describing as poverty porn. There was a thing called Benefit Street and a few other things like that. And they were exploitative, but first and foremost, if you're trying to show people with dignity, rather than taking advantage of them for your own means, that if that is the guiding light, then it's probably going to go okay. But motivations always need to be interrogated. It's always a good question.
Yeah. Does that kind of, because that could have put you off.
Oh, aye.
That could have been the last time that you ever painted a group of people like that. Because it was. I think in any line of work, we're susceptible to criticism. I think as a minister, occasionally people will say, I didn't like that. And that's the thing that you hold on to. And being an artist must be difficult because, there's an element of taste that goes along with this, isn't there? You're just kind of like, I don't like your paintings. I'm not saying I don't like you, but I don't like your paintings. But people feel that they can express that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I started the project at first, there was one person who was part of the congregation who really didn't like the work. And I think she was hoping that an art project in the church would, those posters that you get in the Pauline bookshop, where everyone's kind of like a coloured-in version of the Good News Bible, and they've all got their arms up, and everything's kind of nice rainbow colours.
And there's a cross in the horizon and all that sort of stuff. Yeah,
all that stuff. I think she thought that's what she was getting. I'd already done the Last Supper painting, so but she was really quite concerned that a lot of the paintings were really kind of miserable, and they were. I was trying not to point out that, do you know the good guy dies in this story? I don't want to, spoiler alert. But even though she was really concerned at first, her thoughts came around, and I remember there was one particular painting I did where I painted someone who was sort of in the same generation as her, and I don't know, just something really. There was a light bulb moment. For some people, when talking about taste, there was one painting I did that a few people were kind of horrified about. There was a newborn baby that I painted. Now, for the Gospel of Luke chapter 2, it was really important for me that the birth of a child would look like the birth of a child. So a good friend of mine, Chris Hoskins, he'd taken photographs at his son's birth. He'd got permission from the folks who were working in the hospital. And he had this incredible shot of his son just born, umbilical cord still attached. And I got in touch with him and asked, what would you think about me doing a painting based on this photograph? And him and his wife just loved the idea. So that went ahead. And interestingly, Alistair Duncan, who's the minister at St George's Tron, he loved the idea too, and he's got kids and now he's got grandkids. And I think anyone who'd actually been there at the birth of a child really loved the painting. But folks who had a kind of mythological idea about what new babies and what a baby Jesus should look like were utterly horrified, because it's someone coming into the world is a shocking experience for everyone involved, especially if you're doing it for the first time. Do you know? So I wanted to capture just a little bit of that shock of the new. Now and again, it's not that bad to ruffle a couple of feathers, something like that.
Yeah, the story you're telling, the guy in it did that quite often, didn't he? That Jesus guy was
yes.
quite good at ruffling a few feathers.
And I suppose the thing that doesn't get lost on me is the irony of the fact that those people would quite happily put a newborn baby in a thing full of straw because that's what happened in the gospel, as if that's okay.
Yeah. And so there's been some quite fun moments like that over the time, but yeah, it was a really fun project to do, and I'll never. I guess the biggest takeaway that I'll always have from that project is that if a church can do anything to make the people in the community that it's part of interested, it's make them curious about something, give people a sense of welcome, and make them curious. That's my two biggest takeaways from that project.
What's happened to that work? So people can see it, can't they?
A wee bit tricky just now because we're in lockdown.
Well, next
all the paintings are on my website, so they can be seen like that. The theory is that St George's Tron, where they have a permanent home, will always kind of have a sort of rolling exhibition, and at different times and different seasons put out different paintings. There was supposed to be for the Edinburgh Festival, Russell McClarty was wanting to take all the paintings through to his church in Edinburgh to have a full exhibition of them there. So there's ongoing conversations about the paintings going to different places, and we deliberately got packaging for them all, these kind of foam corners that go on the frames and cardboard boxes to put them all in. So if you've got a van, you can probably borrow them if you can sort out the insurance and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, brilliant. So that period has ended for you. So
yep.
The kind of so two questions. What's lockdown like for an artist? That's the first question. So how's that been going for you?
Well, my wife and I have 3 teenage daughters, so lockdown's been busy. We have a busy household, and I've been able to get on with plenty of artwork, which has been good. I finished off the Srebrenica project, also working on some other paintings. There was supposed to be an exhibition in a gallery on Bath Street in Glasgow called the Glasgow Gallery. They usually get loads of Joe Lomo's stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been shifted to September. Possibly some of the Srebrenica paintings will be going into that, working on some other paintings. There's pluses and minuses with lockdown. There's some work that I've been able to concentrate on. There's some projects that had to be paused. There was a project I was going to do at the Church of Scotland's General Assembly this year. Of course, that didn't happen at all. There was some work I was going to be doing at COP26 in November. Of course, that's been shifted for a whole year. So yeah, just trying to figure out where things go slightly differently. But thankfully, one thing I'd done just before lockdown, completely wasn't planning for lockdown. Nobody was planning for lockdown. But I had done a big photo shoot with a friend of mine who's an actor and has modelled for me a few times. So I've got plenty of material to still work with there. And because I'd finished in November in St George's Tron, I'd done at my studio at home. So it's quite a good space to be able to work in. And then, other wee things come up. Certainly wasn't expecting opportunities like the Reflections at the Quay thing to come up. So yeah, you get nice wee surprises like that.
That's great. And one of your daughters is a fabulous artist.
She is. She's really quite incredible. Jodie's.
Get it.
I blame her mother. Well, my wife and I met at art school actually, so it's not a huge surprise that one of the kids would be particularly interested in art, and she's got a lockdown project that she's working on with Edinburgh hospitals, which is great. They've got someone from each sort of 10-year generation. So she's the teenage one, and there's someone in their 20s, 30s, 40s, etc. So yeah, she's working on a whole load of portraits, specifically of older people in lockdown. Yeah, it's really interesting watching her develop as an artist. That's quite fun.
I said I was going to ask you two things, and I can't remember what the second one is, but I'll remember in a minute. I asked you about Jodie, and it was probably about what on earth are you going to, what's next?
What's next is usually how we finish, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, there's some what next things that I can talk about, and there's some what next things that I can't talk about.
Secret thing, always good.
Well, some stuff with Christian Aid that we're trying to. It's not secret, but
you can't tell a podcast.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. But we're doing some doing a kind of climate change focus with them, and there's a project that we're trying, another different project, trying to get some funding on that I can't talk about just yet. But I'm actually really excited about working with this gallery in the centre of town, and just exploring that area of work, trying to do the gallery thing, because most of the stuff that I've been doing has been commission based. So yeah, it's fun exploring a different area of art, and it's not an easy thing to do art full time and make it work financially. That's a juggle. But yeah, it's nice exploring a different area of that.
One of the things that you've mentioned a couple of times is the kind of event stuff. And I suppose that's an extension of the kind of thing that you were doing at the Tron, that you're painting in front of people. So while something's going on, you're trying to reflect some of that in a piece of art. So how does that work?
Well, generally it's all planned meticulously in advance. And, you know, I've done paintings at events like Solus Festival and Greenbelt and General Assembly. It's quite fun because there's the interaction with folks, and there are very few visual artists who would do that kind of public engagement. But yeah, it's generally quite planned. Trying to make it up on the hoof doesn't really work, especially if you're working specifically from photographs. So it is all quite planned. But there's pluses and minuses with different environments. The year I did the General Assembly, it was not dissimilar from working in St George's Tron, because it was basically in a big cafe area, which was in the Rainy Hall. Doing Greenbelt, I was in the Christian Aid tent, and it was a really hot August bank holiday, and I was melting, utterly melting in this marquee, and I was wearing all black. Everyone was wearing shorts. I didn't even pack shorts. It was boiling. So I think if I was doing events, I probably won't do a tent again.
I guess even the kind of like the paint's going to react differently.
It does, yeah. If it's a really, really hot day, it dries a lot faster. And even oil paint, which normally you'd have about 4 hours of open time, but yeah, it was drying a lot quicker, which is a bit of a shock to the system. But you know, you just kind of get on with things.
Indeed. Portrait Artist of the Year, have you entered? When will we see you?
I've not entered that before. Anytime I've thought about entering, I've always been slightly too late. I'll see an advert and it's like, oh, the applications are closed. Or like the 3 years I was doing St George's Tron, I was just too busy. I wouldn't have been able to set aside the time that it would need. But that would be fun. That would be fun. A friend of mine did it actually. Yeah. Denise Finlay, fantastic portrait artist. And we'd met at art school. She was the year above me. And she's done nothing but painting portraits since art school. She does great. Prince Charles is one of her drawings. I'm pleasantly surprised that there is a space in reality TV for visual artists. That's quite nice.
Even though it's condensed into 4 hours.
I was going to say, like, how do you think you would cope with the challenge of having to produce something like that in a much shorter time scale compared to what you would normally? Like, is that just something that artists get on with?
For that kind of thing, I'd seen one artist who did the show, and his advice was practice lots. Yeah. You know, and if you've got a 4 hour time frame, see if you can get it done in 3, because there'll be interruptions, and you just need to tailor what you're going to achieve in that time. If you're used to working in a way where you would paint a layer and let it dry for a few days,
yeah, of course you can't do that.
That's not going to work. So yeah, you know, find the right way of working for that particular situation.
Ian, thank you so much for giving us your time. Where can we find out about Srebrenica? Where should we go and look?
If you go onto the Remembering Srebrenica Scotland website, they've got some great stuff. The 4 paintings that I've done are on my website as well, idcampbell.com. But yeah, if you go to Google Remembering Srebrenica Scotland, and you'll find lots of information there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.